The first time I met Karen Whitmore, she fined me $500 for having a wheelbarrow visible from the road. It didn't matter that the wheelbarrow was behind my barn, barely peeking out. It didn't matter that I owned 70 acres while she lived in a gated cul-de-sac on a half-acre postage stamp. The HOA's rulebook was her rulebook, and Karen loved nothing more than wielding it like a sword. At first, I did what everyone else did. I gritted my teeth and paid the damn fine. It wasn't worth the headache. Everyone in our rural town of Rockford, Tennessee, had a Karen story. She had fined a retired firefighter for parking his truck in his own driveway, forced a single mother to repaint her porch because the shade of blue was too bold, and nearly ran an elderly couple out of town by hitting them with so many arbitrary citations they couldn't afford their mortgage. But it was the deer that changed everything. Her name was Clover. I had found her tangled in my fence line 2 years ago, barely breathing, a hunting arrow lodged deep in her side. I nursed her back to health in my barn, feeding her by hand until she was strong enough to return to the woods. But Clover never left for long. She roamed freely, coming back to my land every few days to graze and nap in the sun. She was a piece of living proof that things could be saved if you just gave them a chance. Then one day, Clover stopped coming back. I didn't think much of it at first. Deer have their own patterns, and I figured she had wandered farther than usual. But when I noticed a newly dug patch of earth behind the HOA clubhouse, something inside me went cold. It was just too perfect, too out of place, like someone had tried too hard to cover something up. And then I saw it. A scrap of orange collar, poking up from the dirt. Clover had been wearing a GPS tag from the wildlife rescue that had helped rehabilitate her. I reached down, fingers shaking, and pulled the broken collar from the earth. She had been shot, buried, and the person who did it hadn't even cared enough to hide it well. That was when I noticed Karen, standing just beyond the clubhouse door, watching me. She didn't look surprised. She looked smug. "You look upset, Mason," Karen said that night at the HOA meeting, her voice honeyed with fake sympathy. "I do hope you're not planning to make a scene." I stood at the back of the meeting hall, my hands balled into fists. The room smelled of burnt coffee and old carpet, and the long table at the front, where Karen and her loyal little council sat, looked more like a throne room than a neighborhood committee. Karen thrived on these meetings. It was where she got to flex her power, where she smiled while robbing people blind with new fines, new fees, new rules that had nothing to do with making the community better, just making her stronger. I held up Clover's torn GPS collar. The room went silent. "This was on my land," I said, my voice tight. "Clover, my deer, was buried behind the clubhouse, shot. You want to explain that?" Karen tilted her head like I had just accused her of stealing my mail, not killing. "A living creature, Mason," she sighed, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "I had no idea you were so emotionally attached to a deer. But you must understand, wild animals can be a danger to the community. We have rules." "What rule says you can kill a rescue animal and bury it behind an HOA building?" I snapped. Karen's lips twitched, but she didn't falter. She never did. "I don't expect you to understand," she said smoothly, "but as the elected president of this HOA, I have a responsibility to—" A scoff from the crowd. Someone whispered, "Tyrant," under their breath. Karen's eyes flicked toward the room. The control was slipping. She loved control. She needed control. And I had just ripped a crack straight through it. The fines started the next morning. A $250 citation for an unauthorized fence alteration because my cattle gate was an inch too high. A $400 fine for an unregistered farm vehicle because my tractor had been parked too close to the road. A $1,000 penalty for harboring nuisance wildlife. Karen was making damn sure I paid for humiliating her in that meeting. The mailbox was stuffed every morning. It wasn't just me, either. Half the neighborhood suddenly found themselves drowning in notices. Karen was tightening her grip, making an example out of me, but I wasn't the only one suffering, and I wasn't about to sit back and let it happen. That night, I did something I never do. I went online. I wasn't much for social media. but I knew how to use it when I had to. I posted everything, the fines, the threats, and most importantly, what I had found buried behind the clubhouse. I tagged the local news. I tagged the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. I tagged every resident in town. By morning, the post had over 10,000 shares, and Karen had seen it. Her response. She doubled down. She released her own post, calling me a liar, claiming I was spreading dangerous misinformation to sabotage the HOA's hard work. She had doctored photos of Clover, claiming the deer had been sick and had to be humanely euthanized. She was spinning the story, turning herself into the victim. And the worst part? Some people believed her, but some people didn't. And I wasn't done yet. 3 days later, I got a certified letter in the mail. It was from Karen's lawyer. It accused me of defamation, claiming my false accusations were causing irreparable harm to the HOA. They were demanding a public retraction and a $50,000 settlement, or else they'd take me to court. I stared at the letter, and then I smiled, because Karen had just made a big mistake. She thought she could shut me up. She had no idea what was coming. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter from Karen's lawyer spread out in front of me like a loaded gun. My coffee had gone cold. The early morning light barely made a dent in the tension pressing down on me. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees, carrying the sounds of my cattle shifting in the fields. They wanted me to pay $50,000. They thought they could scare me. I exhaled slowly. Karen wasn't just doubling down. She was escalating. This wasn't about Clover anymore. It wasn't even about the HOA. It was about control, and Karen was trying to remind me who held the leash. I ran a hand over my face and grabbed my phone. I knew exactly who to call. Mason? A groggy voice answered after 3 rings. Cody, I need you to do something for me, I said, my voice sharp. There was a rustling on the other end, followed by a curse. Shit, man, you know what time it is? Doesn't matter, I said. Karen just sent me a lawsuit. That woke him up. You serious? As a heart attack. A low whistle. All right. What do you need? Cody ran a small-time investigative blog, mostly local corruption, real estate fraud, the occasional government scandal. He wasn't a journalist, not really, but he had a talent for digging where people didn't want him to. I need everything on Karen Whitmore. Every fine, every shady deal, every HOA fund that doesn't add up. Cody let out a dark chuckle. Oh, buddy, you want me to go skeleton hunting? In her closet? I want her buried under so many skeletons that she can't breathe. Silence. Then, give me 2 days. I ended the call and sat back. My pulse was steady, my focus razor sharp. Karen wanted a war? She was getting one. By noon, Karen had fired her next shot. I walked out to my barn and stopped dead. A bright orange tow sticker was slapped on my truck's windshield. Warning, vehicle will be impounded within 24 hours. A violation notice was tacked to my barn door. Unauthorized structure pending demolition approval. And worst of all, a foreclosure notice. Karen was trying to take my damn house. My breath came slow and steady, but my hands clenched at my sides. She wasn't just trying to break me. She wanted to erase me. She wanted me gone. Not happening, I muttered. I ripped the notices down and went inside. It was time to push back. The town was buzzing. My post had spread further than I expected. A local news station had picked it up, and now the story was making the rounds. Karen, of course, was spinning it. It's just misinformation, she cried in an interview, her voice syrupy sweet. This man has a history of disregarding community rules. The HOA has only ever worked to protect Rockford's integrity. I cut the TV off before I put a hole through it. Karen was playing dirty, so I did the same. That evening, I attended the HOA's emergency community meeting. I walked in wearing my work boots, jeans, and the same flannel I'd been wearing when I found Clover's grave. Let her see the dirt on me. Let her know I wasn't the type to back down. The meeting hall was packed. People weren't just here for HOA business. They were here for the war. Karen sat at the front, draped in power. her perfectly styled blonde hair, her manicured nails tapping against a clipboard, her smug little smirk as she watched me approach the microphone. She thought she'd won. I leaned in, voice low but steady. "How much money have you funneled from the HOA?" The room shifted. Karen's smile froze. "You accused me of defamation," I continued, voice carrying. "But see, that means I'd have to be lying. And the thing about lies, Karen..." I pulled my phone from my pocket and held up the spreadsheet Cody had sent me. "Is that they fall apart when you have receipts?" Karen's fingers tightened around her clipboard. I turned the phone screen toward the audience. "See, I did some digging, and it turns out our dear HOA president has been making some interesting withdrawals. HOA funds don't go to community projects, do they, Karen?" I tapped the screen. "They go straight into your personal account." The silence was thick. Then a single, sharp voice cut through the room. "Is that true, Karen?" Heads swiveled. The cracks in Karen's armor spread. For the first time, her voice wavered. This is ridiculous. He's manipulating." I scrolled. "Here's another one. A $10,000 transfer labeled operational expenses. Except there's no record of that money being spent. No projects, no invoices." I tilted my head. "So where did it go?" Someone in the crowd muttered, "Jesus Christ." Karen's face flushed red. "These are private HOA records. This is illegal." "Actually," I cut in, "since HOA fees are paid by the community, these records belong to the residents." I gestured to the room. "Their money. Their right to know." Karen's breathing was shaky. She wasn't used to losing. I took a step back from the mic. "I'll be seeing you in court, Karen." And then, just as I turned to leave, a voice rang out, flat, cold. "You should be careful, Mason. Accidents happen." Karen. My blood went ice cold. I looked back. She wasn't smiling anymore. She just watched me, her nails tapping slow, deliberate beats against the clipboard. Tap, 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 like the ticking of a bomb. The war had just turned personal, and I wasn't sure I'd make it out alive. Karen's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as I walked out of the HOA meeting. My pulse pounded, but I didn't look back. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. The air outside was sharp and cool, the Tennessee night humming with cicadas. But even with the fresh air, I felt like I was still in that meeting hall. Still, trapped in her orbit. Accidents happen. A threat. A warning. A promise. And knowing Karen. It wouldn't just be words. I barely slept that night. By morning, the first shot had already been fired. Someone had cut my fence line. I found it just before dawn. Barbed wire slashed, my cattle scattered. I spent the next 2 hours rounding them up, muttering curses under my breath. I knew who was behind it. Karen wouldn't come at me directly. She never did. She operated in shadows, behind paperwork, behind technicalities. But this wasn't a fine. This wasn't a legal threat. This was personal. By noon, the sheriff was at my door. "We got a complaint," he said, tipping his hat. "Says you threatened Karen Whitmore last night." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "That's Rich. She's the one who..." He held up a hand. "I ain't saying I believe her. Just doing my job." But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't here for the law. He was here to warn me. Karen was tightening the noose. And if I didn't act fast, she'd win. Cody called me that afternoon. "I got her." I leaned forward. "What?" "Karen. The money trail? It's worse than I thought. She's been laundering HOA funds through fake maintenance contracts. Thousands of dollars. And get this," his voice lowered. "She's in deep with a developer out of Knoxville. They've been trying to buy up land cheap. Foreclosures." The realization hit me like a truck. Karen wasn't just running an HOA. She was running people out. On purpose. She was systematically ruining homeowners, forcing them into foreclosure, and selling their land off under the table. I felt something, dark curl in my chest. She tried it on me. She had tried it on dozens of others. And now she was going to burn. The final showdown wasn't in a courtroom. It wasn't in a quiet, clean legal battle with paperwork and signatures. It was in fire and fury. The night before the next HOA meeting, I leaked everything, the fake contracts, the bank records. Every single stolen dollar. I sent it to the news, the state auditors, the town council, and then, as the final nail, I sent it to every single homeowner in Rockford. By morning it was war. The HOA meeting was a mob. The room was packed, voices raised, a crowd demanding Karen's head. Karen sat at the front, her usual smugness gone. For the first time she looked rattled. "You stole from us," someone shouted. "Where's our money, Karen? Explain the contracts." Karen stood. She tried to regain control, smoothing her blouse, raising a hand. Now, I understand you're all upset, but you're a thief." The room erupted. Karen's mask cracked. She turned her glare on me. "You did this." I smiled. "No, Karen, you did." And that's when the police walked in. Sheriff Walker. 3 deputies. The second Karen saw them, she knew. Her jaw clenched. Her fingers curled into her clipboard so tight I thought it might snap. "Karen Whitmore, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying financial records." The room exploded in gasps and murmurs. The sheriff stepped forward. "We have the bank records, the contracts, the stolen HOA funds." Karen's face twisted into something ugly. This is a mistake. Ma'am," the deputy said, pulling out cuffs. "Turn around." And for the first time, Karen had no control. Her power gone, her kingdom burning around her. I watched as they cuffed her, read her rights, and led her out of the hall. Her eyes met mine one last time. There was no hatred, no rage, just shock, like she had never imagined a world where she lost, and then she was gone. Rockford changed after Karen's fall. The HOA dismantled. Her house seized. The stolen money, most of it recovered. I stood on my porch a week later watching the wind roll through my fields. Clover's grave was still there, a reminder of her, of what she took, of what she lost. And then, with a slow breath, I went inside. For the first time in a long time, I was free.